Thank you for joining us on the fire safety stage. My name is Craig Wells. I'm a sales director at Quelfire, manufacturer and supplier of passive fire protection products. And I'm joined by Nasar and Graeme, who I'm sure can introduce themselves. We're going to be speaking about Gateway 2 and focusing on some of our learnings. So what we know now, I guess Gateway 2 has been on everyone's mind for the last few years, and we've often been discussing about what it might mean for us. So hoping to bring a bit of informed conversation to the audience today. So Graeme, kick off with an introduction, who you are and your experiences, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Graeme Whitty from Willmott, Dixon, Tier 1 main contractor. I head up the national product team, which is like a central compliance and solutions group of people in the business, trying to steer the business in the right thing. I've obviously been concerned with fire safety and compliance for many years. We have a long track record of residential housing developments, which obviously the new building safety regulator is fully concerned with. And so this is right within our wheelhouse and the new normal for a large amount of our pipeline.
Thank you. Nasar?
Yeah, Nasar Ishfaq. I'm director at R5 Consultants. We do principal design and fire engineering. And myself, I sort of started with this process as the Act came out. I'd been sort of going out, talking to everyone across the industry, all the contractors and other architects' practices about what this would mean. And then as the secondary legislation came out, we were sort of first to market on delivering the principal designer role and then fire engineering. And I think what we found over the sort of 30, 40 applications we've put in is that largely there's a lot of inconsistency from the regulator on what they're looking for, the types of questions that they ask. And I think also sort of them getting their teams briefed on what their internal policies are going to be. And I think it's really good to see the CLC has sort of worked more directly with the BSR. And there's now some guidance they put out a couple of months ago that the BSR is sort of committed to as well. So it gives us, it's not answering all the questions, but at least it's setting a benchmark of expectations on submissions. And I think the challenge we've had even from that is then agreeing with the BSR and the actual submission we're putting in, whether they agree to the details, or whether they want some more information. And I think a large part of it has just been sort of basic professionalism of them finding information that's submitted. And we've not really had a huge amount of technical challenge come back so far.
That's good. Thank you for that introduction. So you, Graeme, you referred to this being the new normal. I think that was the expression you used. So perhaps we could start with a question focusing on expectations versus reality. So what were your expectations for Gateway 2 applications and how has that sort of played out into reality as we see it now?
I think our original expectation was that it would be difficult, and the reality was it was difficult. So our first application went in right at the start of the process, so we were Pathfinder, and you really don't want to be first in this type of thing. Everyone's finding their feet, so our team, our consultants, advisors, and the regulator were all in no man's land. So as we said, no one knew what was expected at that level. You're trying to pitch it at the right place, time and cost come into it. How much information do you need? What format does it need to be into? What level of detail do we have to go down to? How is it connected to? And we knew it would be difficult to do because it's new, and it was. So it did take a toll on the team doing it, and it's massive amount of learning has gone back into our business, how we operate, how we deal, connect with our consultants, supply chain partners as well. So a lot of great learning to back into it, which sort of all reinforces our current ethos of trying to do the right thing at the first time for the benefit of everyone, including the project.
Thanks, Graeme. Nasar, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think we were sort of quite eager to engage with the HSE and the BSRs they were developing. So early on, so 2023, they were doing a lot of online calls that you could join in Q&As, ask questions about things. And they were really, initially thought that was really fruitful. And obviously there was a large pushback late to just before the regulations came out about introducing staged applications, which they then did. I think the trouble we found, and I submitted probably 4 of the initial, first 10 applications I went to the BSR. And some of them were staged, some of them were looking for full applications, some were sort of using approval of requirements. And I think the trouble we found is that although there's these policy people at the BSR who are out sort of talking shop about what they're going to be doing, sadly they hadn't actually briefed the people that were reviewing the applications. And so when it came to it, there was a massive disconnect as to what they were willing to accept. I think there was also an initial internal policy to push this agenda of sort of completed design and completed construction detailing. And the regulator really didn't have a clear idea of what that looked like. And the market certainly, wanted to hold it off on that. And I think what it created is the first sort of 20, 30 applications, some of them eventually got passed. They took sort of 10 months, 10 and a half months because one, the contractors and developers just didn't want to accept reality. And two, the regulator was still sort of formulating its view as to what an acceptable submission would look like. And I think even speaking to a lot of the other tier ones that had approvals, there's a massive sort of variation into how much detail they put into those. Some had literally submitted to a completed stage 3, early stage 4 consultant design, submitted that in no contractor details and had approval within 12 weeks. Others had given a lot more detail from their sort of suppliers for, whether it's lifts or stairs or all these elements, and it had taken sort of 9 months to finally get approval. So I think now there's probably more consistency in terms of the expectation. It's just taking a lot of time to get that initial feedback.
Good, I think that's clear. Moving on to the concept of roles and responsibilities and design ownership. I guess there's we've come on a journey of different consultants, different design teams. Some seeing this as an opportunity, others seeing it as a bit of a headache. So, any thoughts and comments on who should be sort of carrying design responsibility, and kick off the conversation? I know it's a big one.
Yeah, I'd probably say from our side as principal designers, a lot of what we do initially is we've got our own schedule of what we're expecting to submit for Gateway 2, who we think should be providing that information. And really the first exercise we have for probably a week or two is sending that around the whole design team for them to say, right, what have you been appointed for and what are you delivering? And where's the gap in that expectation? And one thing we found is that, the developer thought they were buying a certain set of services, the contractor thought they were novating a different set, and the engineers are actually supplying something very different. And that's where sort of you come into a lot of it, hopefully. And that exercise has been very fruitful. I think generally where we find the difficulty when it comes to fire stopping is that it requires a higher level of certainly M&E coordination to know where all your penetrations are, what the pipe works are, what the ducts are, and therefore what fire stopping do you need. And the trouble is in getting everyone, all the other consultants, the architects, structures, to get to a point of resolution, to be able to decide that, takes a certain amount of time. And we are getting a lot of pushback from consultants who are basically saying, look, we can't do that within a 10-week stage 4 like it used to be, or even a 12-week, and this needs to be sort of 6 months or 7 months. And developers really are stuck because they've got options on piece of land, they're bleeding serious amounts of cash to make these projects viable, and ultimately they have a line in the sand that they have to meet. And I think reality is that these approval requirements mean that we will get to that point of resolution before we build it, which was always the intention. It just won't be at this date in the calendar, it'll be further down the line. So we're not necessarily against it because it pushes the requirement, it gives the regulator that point where they will review it. The trouble we found in practice is take on non-HRB projects where we don't have a Gateway 2. We've had, where we've not been directly involved, but the contractors come to us and said, we've had a massive problem, all the fire stopping's wrong, and we've got to remediate an entire new hospital extension, hotel extension, and an existing building. And you can see the pain it's causing at that point. The question is, why not avoid that pain and do this beforehand and put in a gateway, a stop and go, to make sure these details are correct.
Graeme, so as a main contractor, principal contractor, how do you manage all that? How do you set out those expectations for all the different parties?
Well, that's effectively what we're paid to do, in my view. So we are the project manager of the team. We are the coordinator. We are front and centre in that decision loop. And by the time we're passing it on to the PD, who's doing it. We should have made in our own minds that design responsibility clearly allocated to all the partners. We've appointed them under that scope, so they're getting paid to do those services, and we understand all the partners, which bit are they doing. So that's how we like to work in our business. Obviously, some of the contractual routes that we go down don't facilitate that. So you might be novated, you might be given a design team that you haven't worked with before, different expectations, different standards, and you have to do the hard yards, unpick all of that. We carry the can with the principal contractor. We sign that declaration at the end that says we've built it in accordance with regs. So we need to have that confidence that the design we inherit allows us to do that. So we are integral in that decision process of where the responsibility sits with the right party who has the knowledge to be able to give you that solution.
That's helpful. So I think really, if I could summarize what you're saying is you recognize your responsibility and you have a clear plan articulated to the relevant parties and designers, consultants, and those expectations are managed. Yeah. Good. So you're on the receiving end of that. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I think with fire stopping, the challenge is that is probably one of those few elements of construction that is genuinely collaborative. You know, the architect will set their positions of all these walls and other things. The structural engineer will dictate, what size of the openings and letterboxes can be. And then the M&E engineer needs to tell you what's actually passing through and where. And then you can come to a resolution on what the fire stopping needs to be. Is the letterbox the right size? And I think all of the other consultants will sort of get to their point eventually. But the trouble is no one wants to say what the fire stopping should be. And I think because there's such a focus around certification and the setting out of it, we've actually just had an appointment to basically be that conduit to say these details and the fire stopping you're selecting is correct or not. And I think some of this seems to be silly because it's a PI issue. The competence should be there in the industry. I don't think it always is. But this is what we were talking about before, that I think we're moving in a direction that eventually you'll have fire stopping specialists, like just like we've got facade engineers and others, where this becomes a specialism where a consultant steps in to do it. At the moment, it's somewhere between yourselves and the tier one contractors to carry the ultimate liability. And I don't know, is this just a PI issue that we need to resolve, or is this a genuine issue of competency and resolution? But at the moment, I think suppliers like yourselves are being very helpful and useful. I just think the team collectively needs to, take their responsibility and give the confidence they need.
No, I think you're absolutely right. So something we talk a lot about at Quelfire is the need of collaboration and communication. And as you say, all these relevant parties will influence the final decision, and there needs to be the forum, the basis for all those parties working together, and it's through true leadership. And again, to make anything of Willmott Dixon, just because Graham's on the stage, but we do see that there's a clear leadership, there's a mandate to make it work, and if there is a mandate to make it work, it does work. So it's great to see that. And good. Moving on to some of the practical realities of submitting to the BSR. I suppose there's been lots of perhaps negative press about the challenges of getting submissions in, but is there any key learnings from the process that you could share with the audience that they could take away?
Yeah, I think from our side, the first exercise really helps. So everyone knows what they've got to submit. We can then track that, let them know we've sort of received it, we've reviewed it, we're happy with the level of detail that's going to go in. Essentially, our team of fire, structural, civil, mechanical, and engineers and architects work together to get to that. So we'll challenge back and make sure we're happy with it. But ultimately, when the mechanics of what you're looking to submit, a lot of it is about design procurement alongside the other elements of actual product and system procurement that has to go on. And I don't think developers and contractors have got to the point yet where they think about design procurement in as much detail as they think about subcontractor and product procurement. And I think once they've sort of nailed that and they're clear on what information they're getting and when it's going to be delivered, then we can have a more sort of systematic approach to sort of whether it's approval requirements or staged applications or the amount of detail we're submitting and when, to articulate that to the regulator. So that's always been, even now, That's always been the key challenge. Everyone first asks us, how much detail do we need to submit, and who's going to provide it? And I don't think the sort of the communities in this room and the industry has come to an agreement on that. So we tried to take the leadership on that, tell people from all the other applications we've submitted, where we've had feedback, where there's been issues, and what we need to resolve. So even this morning, I had a call about, our architect doesn't want to submit, plans about the core. And we're like, well, if you don't have a core, you don't have a building. So what on earth are they doing? They need to submit that so the structures can do what they need to, M&E can do what they need to, and you can do what you need to do. And I think it's just that fundamental understanding for whether they're not being paid for it or they don't want to take responsibility, but it's like, just stop and think, what are you actually doing? This is literally is what holds up the whole building. So if you're not issuing details for it, what do you expect the rest of us to do? And what confidence does that give to the BSR?
Graeme, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, we can play our part too as a main contractor. We need to be clear about the products and systems that we want to see in the building. So we need to help specify by giving examples and say these are the range of products like Quelfire. These are the system providers. We've seen their evidence. We know what they can do. We like working with them. We know what service they can offer the wider team, and be clear about that and commit to that. So in the past, especially developers and contractors like to keep things a little bit woolly so they can make commercial decisions later on and play the market and get the best commercial price, which does come into it at some point. These projects have to be commercially viable, but for certain decisions, the commercial viability is getting your gateway approval, choosing the horses that you're going to back and driving it through. And that is where you'll get the best gains. You'll save your time in your program. You save going round the wheel, design changes, which slow us all down. It's the unhidden costs that you never price for, but it slows everyone down. You're designing it 2-3 times. You might hit a snag, you might have a false everyone stop, and it's like, we've got something wrong here, which costs time and money. For a small commercial saving on a type of product, make the commitment, be clear with it, and that's what we're trying to drive into our business by what are the select few product suppliers I'm comfortable with, especially for repeating elements. Let's use them again. Cut down the number of options that we have to do, and we'll go a lot quicker.
If I can just come back on that point, a lot of the other contractors we work with, and I'm sure Willmott Dixon is brilliant at this, but there's a huge amount of cost that's lost in aftercare and remedials, and sometimes all of the profit from the job will be lost on remedials because you're doing all that cost, it's all off your bottom line. And I think when we've worked closely with other tier 1 contractors and said, look, if you get these details right, get your QA in place, you won't be losing 40, 50, 60 million a year in aftercare. And that's probably small numbers for a lot of the other tier 1s we're talking about. So realistically, these things are there. Yes, it's causing a hindrance or a delay in getting to site. But from a profitability standpoint and a business sort of security financially, it will help you in the long run. And contractors we've worked with that have got enhanced their QA and are looking at all these details, they are significantly more profitable over time.
That's good. So I guess there's some real commercial benefits for the gateway process. I wondered if we could move on to the topic of competency and culture. Because I guess the introduction of the gateways was really obviously as a result of the Grenfell tragedy, but also an acknowledgement that we need to do better. As an industry, we need to change. And you might say the carrot wasn't working, so we've had to introduce the stick. So what would you say from your experience on the subject of competency? How are we getting on demonstrating competency? And is competency, is there an improvement in competency in our organisations, do you think?
Is it a certificate? Is it a course that you've been on? It's a whole encompassing thing, and we're all struggling with these same questions. We are a massively fragmented industry in how we operate, let alone how people are trained within the various disciplines that they have, and what is their experience, because it all wraps up in it. It is a real difficult one.
Give us a one-sentence definition then, Graeme, of competency.
That you have the confidence to know what you're doing is right, and also know when you're not competent. You know when you're out of your depth, to hold your hand up and go, I don't know enough about this to be clear about what the solution is. I'm going to ask someone else. And that's at every level. That's fundamental. So if you're brave enough, and it is a bit of bravery and courage to sit there, hold your hand up in a meeting or in front of your boss or whatever and go, we can't do this, we need to get some assistance in, that's true competence because you know where your level is at. If you're blasé and go, yeah, we'll crack on and sort that out later, that's not competence in my view.
Know what you know and know what you don't know. Nasar.
Yeah, I think from our side, we tried to embed that sort of into the culture of the whole business as I started. So even as we were meeting people and bringing them on board, a lot of it was sort of saying, look, this is where you're at the moment. If you want to increase your salary, which everyone wants to do, great target, bonuses, all that, go and get these accreditations. You need to do this course. You need to get an accreditation in it. You need to be able to deliver that actually practically on a project. And that is going to be your route to sort of having a better career. I think one thing I'd found experience working at a lot of the top 2 AJ practices and all that sort of good stuff is that you would have really competent people who just didn't want to do management functions or didn't want to do director functions, and they weren't great at sales, and so their salaries just stayed where they were for the last 20 years, but they were great at their job. And I think sometimes culturally in businesses, we promote the wrong thing. And so from our side, it was a case of, look, you want to join us, that's great. This is where you're at the moment. This is where we want you to get to. And you're going to have a target with your probation or quarterly review that if you meet that and you do those courses and we'll pay for you to do them, you'll improve your knowledge and your skills to be able to deliver that. I think the other side we found, particularly on the principal designer side of the market, there was a lot of people who were just saying, look, we're already doing CDM-PD, this is just another type of health and safety. So they just rebranded all their health and safety PDs into building safety people, and now they're building safety experts, wherever that means. And so you've still got these guys who sort of came at McDonald's, did an EBOSH course for 2 weeks, and now they're a BRPD of some sort. And I just found that bizarre, and I was like, look, as an architect who's delivered buildings, I don't know everything about building. So I hired a structure engineer, got a fire engineer, got a mechanical engineer, got a civil engineer, because they know those elements of construction. And so you need an experienced, competent person who can coordinate those other elements of design. And it's not, like I was being asked before, just give me a big tick list of everything I need to check, and I'll just ask someone they've checked it, and I've BRPD'd this project. And it's like, that's not what you're supposed to do. And like you said, we don't always have the answer. So we come to you, we come to the other experts in the room. We work quite closely with other contractors, mainly because the benefit you have is that you supply and install these materials. Your company manufactures them. You know how they work. You know when there's problems, and you feed that back into your technical literature. So we sort of give a lot more value to what suppliers like yourself and others in the room will tell us, because you've got the hands-on experience and the pain of having to remediate afterwards.
Thank you. So I guess we use this SCEB framework, don't we, for competency? So skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. I was at an event recently where someone added leadership and resource, and I thought that was an excellent addition to it. So you've got the right people with the right skills and the knowledge and the right experience. They've got the behaviours, they want to do what's right. But as we've been saying, it needs leadership. It needs someone to push those people in the right direction and give them the resource, which could be time, it could be extra qualifications, and so on. And I think that's, for me, it was a bit of an insightful wake-up call to the traditional definition of competency. It's SCEB plus leadership and resource. So excellent. We'll move on in the interest of time. We're going to talk about subcontractor readiness and on-site delivery. So I guess the whole concept of the gateways was, of course, to, if you like, better up the process of design, but it's got to materialise onto site as well. And I know there's obviously concerns from contractors about, well, what if projects get delayed as a result of Gateway 2 submissions and so on. So I wondered how you're dealing with that, Graeme.
Yeah, the delay we've suffered. Our first Gateway 2 submission did suffer an extended delay, so that has cost us money as a business because it's delayed. Cost contractors. You're not filling in pipeline. We've got teams waiting to go on the never. When is it going to land? Customers who wants their building, they've got funding issues as well. So the clock is always ticking. So that is always a problem for us. Our supply chain partners want some surety of when they're going to be seeing some money from these projects coming in if they're committing time and resources to it. So it does cause us problems, but we have really enhanced our pre-start procedures on sites when our subcontractors, that first instance. So you've dealt with all the commercial stuff, you've selected your supply chain partners, and then you're on site. Our site team, their site team, going through what are the deliverables on this project? What are we building? What's the evidencing going to be? How often are you going to evidence it? And what does good look like? And those conversations we're seeing, driving massive value in making us more efficient on site, more productive for both of us. So we're all making money because every delay on site and errors on site just cost everyone time and money, which is not what we're here to do. And you're having those real conversations, and that's when the behavioural piece comes out. So you're really seeing what's the behaviour of the supply chain partners we've got, and you're seeing that collaboration, that willingness to put some effort into some meetings and plan, prepare. This is what we're going to do, commit to it, and then delivery out on the park should be, and we are seeing does get a lot easier for everyone. Less conflicts, which no one wants to have on site. Stress levels and everyone's mental health is difficult when projects are not going well. You can't avoid that. But planning, starting properly and being clear about what you're doing and what the expectations are from day one does drive massive benefits all the way through from then on.
That's good. Nasar, anything to add to that?
Yes, obviously the last 2 years or so, I've spent a lot of time with other contractors and done sessions for their subcontractors and others about what's going to be expectation, what information they need to supply for the golden thread, the QA process that's been enhanced and so on. So some of them have been receptive. I think realistically, there's not been enough work for particularly HRB stuff that's actually gone on site that we can road test and say this has worked or not, and supply chains have actually learned or not, because we know a few people in the market, they've hit their Gateway 3, they've now been waiting 4 months, one of even 10 months to get approval of Gateway 3, and that's really going to feed back to the market and say this is what we should have done, and that knowledge will spread. So there's not been enough of that across the UK for us to really say what we've learned. So a lot of what's happening at the moment is just preparing to avoid disaster like what Willmott and the rest of the industry is doing. We've seen some contractors really upping their QA process, really making sure that their site staff are trained, that they've all got some sort of site passport, they know who's on site, who's installed something. I think realistically the supply side of the market is doing a lot better. Yourselves, also alongside I was in with some of these masonry shelf suppliers and people who do those sorts of products. And they've done a great job. They've got all the QA in point. The trouble is they stop at the point of delivery. So the trouble we're having is when it comes to site, who is then checking that competence? Who is making sure it's done correctly? And I don't think has been road tested enough yet for us to say we've got a working model. There's some great pieces of software about, but it's not been implemented enough. And I think not enough contractors have taken advantage of their transitional projects and their non-HRBs to actually road test their QA for when they come to HRB projects. And probably the last thing I'd say is that ultimately, we have the same level of duties on high-risk buildings and non-high-risk buildings. The big difference is there's no enforcement on the non-HRBs. The RBCAs are not turning around to us and saying, I'm not giving you a completion certificate because you don't have any photographs or video capturing the installation was correct. And that's not pushing the market where it needs to be. So when it comes to the HRBs, and it's all the same subcontractors, I think we're going to have a big mess because they've not got into the new culture and they've not actually put these systems in practice. Some of them are, showing us things that look great, they sound great, but they've not been tested. And we know until these things are actually put into practice and we come out of a solution that the BSR tells us what the threshold and the bar is, we're not really going to know that we're there or not.
So I guess what we're saying is there's a lot of focus on Gateway 2 and for all the right reasons, but Gateway 3, what are we doing to prepare for it? Graeme, what's your thoughts?
I think, as you just said, it's the execution of what you set out to do. So if you have delivered your design properly, you haven't got, and change control comes into that whole factor. You've got the design, you're demonstrating that you have installed it as per what you've approved with, and it comes down to evidencing. And as we said, we're all focusing on HRBs because they're right in the forefront, but that is quite a small percentage of the UK construction side of it. The law or the regulations, the building regs are the same for non-HRBs. I'll still have to demonstrate I've built it right. As a contractor, I've got a 15-year liability that I have built it right. So the evidencing, you ramp it up for a HRB because of the scale of the projects and the detail that you need to go into, but that premise sits there behind every project you do. Single-storey school still needs to show it complies with building regulations. So we have the same processes for non-HRBs to HRBs, and they just get ramped up when the regulator needs to have that oversight. But your RBI now has to sign off get your building certificates. You still have to submit all your information. They have a little 8-week period, and they're being checked on that. So what have they done to verify why they're releasing their building completion certificate? They're going to have to start looking at the evidence that we've done for a school, for a small block of offices or something like that. Different level of assurance, maybe, but it's still the same processes. And I'd say sometimes, there's lots of tech companies here today, all offering us different solutions. I haven't found one that does everything yet, and if there is someone here, you can come and talk to me afterwards. We'll make a quick exit. But beware, they sell the dream, and in the reality, it's very different. And they don't do all the things that we need them to do. So as soon as one of these tech companies cracks that, they're going to be the market leader. It'll be really good. But they're all good in their little niches. They do small things very well. But as a main contractor, we're responsible for everything. So you have to be master of all trades.
So if you're not preparing for Gateway 3, better start now, because still a lot of changes ahead.
Yeah, well, that's the worry, isn't it? We don't know what Gate 3 will entail. So you going back in time, it's like, what information did I need to prove that my piling went in properly? It's a bit late thinking about it when you're submitting a Gateway 3. And you need to have that plan. You need to understand it, collect the evidence as you go for all your packages. You can't leave it to the end, the mad dash in the last few months of a project. You won't be able to do that.
Good, I think that's very helpful. So moving on to some advice and learnings, I wondered if you could both just share with us a sort of key non-negotiable for someone in the room here that's approaching their first Gateway 2 submission. What's one thing they've got to get absolutely right, non-negotiable, in order to have a successful application?
I think the bare minimum is you have to have at least a coordinated consultant design. Let's just start at that as a first baby step. I think too many applications, it's like, submission date's on Friday as always. We need to have all it done. Yeah, we're all going to do it. We're going to do it. Come Wednesday, but we're not going to have this bit. Come Thursday, we're not going to have that bit. And sorry, we've not been able to change the backgrounds and all that nonsense. It's like, look, I need to submit to the BSR a coordinated set of drawings, at least, that explain what we're building. If you've got doors in different positions and shafts in different locations and all of that, it doesn't make sense to me reading it, let alone the BSR. So I think really, as architects, we're always primarily, bad at this, is that we work up until the deadline and past the deadline. And so it's sort of lastminute.com. But it's a culture across the sector. Let's just first get a coordinated set of drawings. And after that, we can talk to the BSR about, piling design and waterproofing design and all of that. And if we need to, approve requirements and other things to massage it to give us enough time later. But if you're not getting an actual coordinated design from your consultants that is complete, is accurate, you're falling before even the first gate,
Well, there's probably two things from us. The first is I'm going to steal an analogy that a regulatory lead from the BSR shared with us, and he says, think of all your design information as a jigsaw puzzle, and it's all the various bits that connect together to form the whole of your building. And that's in a box. It's all shaken up and mixed up in a box. And your compliance statement is the picture on the front of the box that says what you're building. So it is that route map of what you're going to achieve at the end of it, and it shows how all the pieces connect to each other and how all your information intercoordinates. And it is that clear picture. You're leading the regulator on that journey of your decisions, what you've done, the rationale that you've put into it, and you're helping them make that decision. If you just hand over loads of information and it's poorly signposted, not connected, not coordinated, simple things, drawing references are incorrect, or you refer to a report that didn't make it into the submission, they pick up on that, and it starts to ask questions. You've got to make it easy for the regulator to follow your train of thought. And if you've gone through it and you've got a coherent compliance statement, you have got a train of thought. You've done the pre-checking for them. There's a second point as well, which I've now forgotten. Come back to me.
So a coordinated design and a well-coordinated plan on how to navigate what you're submitting here. So coordination is key, I think, is what you're both saying. Excellent, carry on, Graeme.
In the early days when we were, submitting to the regulator, they were very standoffish. You didn't get any feedback. There was little communication. This is a collaborative process about having dialogue with the regulator. And under the new leadership, we've seen a complete shift change in their approach to it. So our regulatory leads and our project leads speak to each other on a daily, if not weekly basis. It's that two-way dialogue, that communication, and hopefully that is the mode of operation that they're going to follow. Because without that dialogue, without that interaction between the two parties, it just gets infinitely harder. So your project management from contractor side or submitter side is like, you need to be that proactive. You need to have a voice. You need to be speaking and talking to your regulatory leads to get that dialogue with them. Have you got enough information? Do you understand it? What's missing? What do you need from us? How can we help some of these blockers that you're facing?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do in all our applications now, having done some of them fed back, is a sort of a preface document. And think of it a bit like a design and access statement, but for your building control submission. And it's basically telling them, this is what we're building, this is what we've submitted, this is where you can find it. And I know it sounds like sucking eggs, but that's really what you have to try and do, because we found all of the reg leads and all of the MDTs we hear back from, the first thing they say is we couldn't find the information. There's too many folders to click through, really sort of silly things, but that clear narrative of exactly what you're submitting, exactly where everything's saved, it sounds very simple, but it's the first thing they'll come back on, and they'll use that as a sort of an excuse to delay submission. So taking that on board, whether it's embedded in the compliance statement or you do as a separate document, take the time to prepare that sort of preface to explain your submission to them as someone who's completely fresh, has no idea what they're doing, so they can at least navigate themselves through it. And then after that, you'll have to think about what you've submitted. Is there enough detail there, and will you submit something, from contractor design or tech subs and other things later on?
Good, that's very helpful. So I'm going to suggest that if you could go back to your very first Gateway 2 submission, if you can remember, what would you do differently? I'm going to link that in the interest of time. I think we've got 10 minutes left before we'll take questions from the audience. You can wrap that up with some final thoughts. Graeme?
Well, our one, quite simply, we should have waited 6 months. Is the simple answer. We weren't ready as a business and a consultant team. The regulator definitely wasn't ready to receive whatever information we handed them over, and that just caused lots of problems. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but to take a 6 month pause would have been beneficial to everyone. But that's a very difficult, and we didn't know at the time. So.
Yeah, I think the first ones I submitted was sort of April of 24, so just after the transition period, April, May 24. And I think what we were trying to do is convey to the contractor and the client what the expectation of the BSR was going to be. And I think we pushed as hard as we could against sort of a shut door. But I think if we had the engagement with the CLC and we had that sort of confidence in the information we have now to sort of spell it out and talk through these other routes, the approval requirements or other things, maybe that would help the application a bit more. I think the trouble was, even back then, the BSR didn't know the regulations. And I remember my first meeting with the BSR, and they were coming in, look, we're going to refuse your application and whatnot. I said, hang on, why are you doing that? I said, there's no information. So they said there's no structural information. So I said, right, here's our submission. There's a structural folder. There's 500 files in that folder. Can you tell me what's missing? And then they sort of went back and reviewed it. And I think that, again, is what told us this preface document, this explanation, will really help them, take out those first few excuses to just knee-jerk refuse applications. And so I think early on, people should have been a bit more forthright with the regulator and a bit more confident in their submissions.
Thank you. That's been very insightful, I'm sure. And no doubt there's a few questions in the room. If anyone's brave enough to speak up, then I'm sure one of our speakers here will be glad to answer for you.
Mic,
yeah.
Please.
Any questions? Yeah. Front ahead.
My question is, sorry about that. My question is, does the panel have any views on the discrepancy between the desire to complete the fire stopping design at stage 4 although the final MEP design is often done by the trades, and therefore the coordination is not able to be completed in time for the full application to commence.
Yeah, this is where the change has had to happen. We as contractors must commit to a certain amount of CDP to enable those decisions to be made. So that's a difference to the way it's done normally. You have your MEP consultant design leading the way, and then CDP happens later on in the process. We, as the main contractors, have to commit to procuring that CDP design. So we need to choose which way we're going to go, what products we're going to use, what supply chain we're going to use to deliver it a lot earlier in the process, which means our customers might have to commit more time and resources to enable us to do that, because it can't be at our risk, obviously. So that's the way to do it. Otherwise, you're back in this loop where I've designed something, I can't fire stop. And that's the change that we've had to have as an industry. There's no easy way around that, unfortunately. It's a difficult one. We're pushing hard. Some of our customers understand that and come along the journey with us. Some of our more commercial customers might need a bit more convincing. But the flip side of that is the pain where it goes wrong. And if your customer doesn't feel that pain, then they're not going to see the benefit of investing earlier on. So it is a difficult one.
Summarised by the concept of design and then build. Not design and build, or build and try and come up with a design that works while we're building. Any more questions?
I was just going to say that, is there, or do you think that you're going to experience kind of efficiencies from the design team and not having as many queries from when you get to site because of the process?
Definitely so. Yeah, it's, designing and change out on site just slows everything down. And generally, you've got the wrong people in the room doing it. You've got your construction team. You don't have the full consultant team there driving it through. You may not even have a design manager on some of these projects. Maybe not HRBs, but what I'm getting at is you really need the competent people to making those design decisions. You have a design, you have a plan, you're executing a well thought through, coordinated plan at the end of the day. And that's exactly how it should be. It's really expensive designing on the hoof on a live project. That's the worst time to do it. So we are hoping we'll see efficiencies from our site team. So you can take out downtime, you can be more confident that you're going to deliver to your program, so you don't have time delays. So we know when we're going to hand buildings over. If it's a private sales scheme, you know when you're going to get units coming through to hit sales targets, etc. And we're more confident with that, delivering to program. So hopefully we will see that efficiencies coming through, yes.
I'd probably just add to that, I think initially when we thought about this, we thought everyone will get on board, we'll get all the design done early, contractor design, all engaged, everything finished. The practicality of that has been that there's still a lot of CDP that happens post Gateway 2. And I think that's going to be the dominant narrative for all projects going forward. And one thing I would feed in, because we deal a lot with developers as well, is that most of the large developers out there that I've been in to talk to, normally in a year, they might have 10 large projects that go on site. When they were looking at this and the funding costs for the extra design, because they can't necessarily draw down on forward funders till they're on site. So that meant that they had to fund a lot more projects. So they went from doing 10 projects a year to 2 or 3 projects a year. And that's basically completely changed their financial models. It's having an impact, in terms of how many projects go on site. I think there's already a recession brewed in this part of the industry that piling contractors are already experiencing, and it's going to come through the rest of the industry. So you have to keep in mind that ultimately we want to build well, and some of the expectations of the BSR and in the way they wanted to do it has caused that problem. It's not resolved the technical issue, because the technical issue will be resolved at a point in time. So you just have to keep in mind that, practically speaking, there will be ongoing coordination with contractor design elements that will cause some sort of iteration for architects and engineers, but there won't be as much of it. And I think that's probably where we'll see the benefit, because on the HRBs, they'll have to discharge those conditions before they go on site, and that will sort of slow down that last-minute rush of the wrong people in the room making the wrong decisions. So hopefully, I think it will still happen, but it'll just be much more coordinated, much more collaborative, because they need that consent The trouble you're going to have is on the non-HRBs, it's still sort of the Wild West. You can do whatever you want. As long as you cover it up, your RBI is not, your RBCA still aren't really sort of being that forceful.
Good, thank you for those answers. I think we've probably got time for about half a question, but far away.
I've done a few Gateway 2 applications, and one thing I noticed in all of them, I was surprised to hear you guys say you've actually had some dialogue with the BSR, because what we've found is smaller practice is just there's nothing, no feedback at all. And then more recently, when we've done a Gateway 3 application and another one, it's been invalidated and thrown out, and there's no comeback, there's no opportunity to speak to them at all. And then they're rejecting things now that were accepted before, because you just get the feeling they're just trying to deal with as few applications as possible. So if you guys have got an opportunity to speak to them, and also the guidance on what you should submit as well, they come back with reasons to invalidate it when they've not set out those guidelines clearly on what you should submit. So it's just, I'm sure you know, really frustrating.
Yeah, it is really frustrating, especially as a consultant. You've got a client, they've got an expectation, and it's really hard. Like, as an architect, we get used to dealing with local planning authorities, so we kind of know the flavour of what they'll accept, but before we submit it. This is sort of repeating that whole exercise, trying to get an understanding of the flavour of the BSR, what they'll accept at the point you submit it. And the trouble is, there isn't that consistency. So on some projects, we had the same thing. We had initial invalid, well, it wasn't invalid. They asked us to withdraw the application. It's the same as saying it's invalid, or they wanted to refuse it. And then we had to argue back with them and say, give us a reason as to why. And it was only that then opened the channel for discussion. I think on the ones we submitted in the last 6 months, there has been a shift that they will at least tell you what they think or why they want to refuse it. One of the applications we submitted, the first meeting we had with them, they were looking to refuse the application, and that's the one saying where we said, look, we've actually submitted, just go on and review it. So there is a massive issue with the BSR, and I think the politics has helped in some ways. They've set up this new innovation unit, they're committed to 12-week approvals for new builds, but the existing applications that are in, they've given a commitment by December or by Christmas, that 91 that are left will be, discharged. I think that's going to add another side where the BSR is very quick to refuse applications that they just don't want to deal with, or they're not meeting the SLA, or so they're looking for reasons to sort of kick it out. And I think we need to argue back. So I feed back to the BSR sort of every quarter on what it's like as a frequent submitter to, how well they're doing or not. They've taken some of that on board. They are sort of making amendments. It's very painful because they're very slow. They haven't done themselves any favors. And I think also if we were going to be honest about it, the level of technical assessment you get back is generally quite poor. They have some of them are okay, but across the board, it's not great.
I think I would answer that question just by saying there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and there is some positive change happening. There's some more dialogue. There's a lot more guidance, whether it's from experienced persons like we've got on the stage today, and other sources. So don't lose hope. But remember, it's all for a positive reason. The whole reason this has been introduced, yes, it's had teething problems, is to bring about safer buildings and to keep people safe. And we must never lose sight of that. So I think our time is up. I'd like to take the opportunity to just thank everyone for attending London Build and this panel discussion. Thank our speakers. I think it's been very informative. A lot of information there to take in. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.